In 1628, a 9-year-old boy was led into a courtroom in Würzburg, Germany. He wasn't there to testify. He was there to confess. Within 3 days, he had named 14 adults. Within a week, he was dead. His execution was recorded in official documents. His name was added to lists that stretched across pages, and then the process simply continued. What happened in Europe between 1560 and 1660 killed tens of thousands of people. But the killing was never the point. Something else was being built. Step by step, case by case, body by body. A machine that didn't need fuel. A machine that didn't need belief. A machine that only needed repetition. By the time it stopped, entire towns had been emptied. Families had been erased. And everyone left standing had learned the same lesson. Stay quiet, stay invisible, and never ever stand out. This is the story of what that machine actually did. Not the folklore version, not the simplified version you learned in school, the documented version. Every like, every subscription helps us recover one more erased voice. The one with names, dates, and procedures recorded in court archives that still exist today. And why it worked so well that parts of it are still running today. The witch hunts are often placed in the medieval period, in the Dark Ages, in a time of ignorance and superstition before enlightenment arrived. That's completely wrong. They happened later, between roughly 1560 and 1660, during what Europe called the Renaissance and the Reformation, an age of printing presses, universities, international trade, and expanding literacy. Martin Luther posted his thesis in 1517. The Malleus Maleficarum was printed in 1486. The most intense witch hunts happened in the 1600s. These events overlapped. The same society that produced Galileo, Shakespeare, and the scientific method was also burning people alive in town squares. This wasn't a contradiction. It was a feature. Underneath the cultural progress, Europe was coming apart. The Protestant Reformation had split Christianity into competing factions. Catholic and Protestant territories now fought for survival, legitimacy, and control. The 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648, would eventually kill approximately 8 million people. That's roughly 20% of the population in affected regions. Plague outbreaks returned in waves. The Black Death never fully disappeared. Smaller epidemics swept through towns every few years. Harvests failed repeatedly. The period between 1560 and 1660 included what historians now call the Little Ice Age, decades of colder temperatures that shortened growing seasons and devastated crops. Governments were fragile, borders shifted constantly, local authorities competed with regional powers, kings fought with nobles, everyone fought with everyone else. And in the middle of all this chaos, ordinary people were trying to survive. When things went wrong, and things went wrong constantly, people asked why. Why did the crops fail? Why did the children die? Why did the neighbors turn violent? Why did everything feel like it was falling apart? The answer couldn't be random chance. It couldn't be bad weather, disease, or political instability. Those explanations were too impersonal, too uncontrollable, too overwhelming. People needed a cause they could identify, and they needed someone to blame. The devil, not as metaphor, not as symbol, not as distant the theological concept, as an active present force working through human agents to destroy Christian society from within. This belief was nearly universal. Protestants and Catholics disagreed on almost everything. Worship practices, church authority, salvation, the nature of faith itself. But they agreed on this. Satan was real, his servants were real, and they lived. Among ordinary people disguised as neighbors working to bring about the end of the world. When crops failed, it wasn't weather. When children died, it wasn't disease. When communities fractured, it wasn't politics. Someone had made it happen, and that someone lived nearby. Certain people attracted suspicion more than others. The pattern was remarkably consistent across different regions. Widows without family support. Women who lived alone after their husbands died, had no male protection, and little economic security. They were vulnerable and visible. Healers who used herbs and charms. Folk medicine had existed for centuries. But now these practices were reinterpreted as demonic. Midwives present when births went wrong. Infant and maternal mortality rates were extremely high. When tragedy occurred, the person present became the explanation. People who argued with neighbors, A dispute over property, livestock, or debts could linger for years. When misfortune followed, the argument was remembered. People who didn't attend church regularly. In a time of religious warfare, irregular attendance signaled something. People who were simply disliked. Sometimes there was no clear reason, just years of accumulated resentment, envy, or discomfort. Once someone was named, they became the explanation for everything that had gone wrong. The failed harvest 3 years ago, she must have cursed the fields. The livestock that died last winter. He made a pact. The stillborn child. She was there when it happened. Fear didn't require evidence. It required a name. In that year, 2 German inquisitors, Hinrich Kramer and Jacob Springer, published a book, Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches. It wasn't the first text on witchcraft. Books about magic, demons, and evil had existed for centuries. But this one was different. It was systematic, organized, procedural. It explained how witchcraft were. How witches operated. How they were recruited by the devil, how to identify them, how to question them, and most importantly, how to justify what came next. The book was printed across Europe, translated into multiple languages, distributed to courts, churches, and legal authorities. Between 1486 and 1600, it went through 28 editions. It became a reference manual, and it normalized a process. The Malleus made several key arguments. First, witchcraft was real, organized, and widespread. This wasn't folklore, it was an actual conspiracy. Second, witches operated in secret. They hid among ordinary people. They appeared normal. This meant anyone could be a witch. Third, witches would always deny their activities. Denial was expected. Therefore, denial was not evidence of innocence, it was evidence of deception. Fourth, physical evidence could be found on the body. Marks, scars, or areas insensitive to pain indicated a pact with the devil. Fifth, confession was the goal. Everything in the process was designed to produce confession. This logic created a closed system. Accusation triggered investigation. Investigation always found something. The accused always denied it. Denial proved guilt. Interrogation produced confession. There was no exit. Once the Malleus established the framework, courts across Europe began following similar procedures. The process had distinct steps. Step 1. Accusation. Someone makes a claim. A neighbor reports strange occurrences. A relative mentions suspicious behavior. Sometimes a child repeats something they heard. The accusation doesn't require proof. Suspicion is sufficient to begin proceedings. Step 2. Arrest. The accused is removed from their home, usually without warning, often at night. They're taken to a cell, separated from family and community. This isolation serves multiple purposes. It prevents them from fleeing. It prevents others from helping them. It signals to the community that the authorities have taken action, and it begins the process of breaking down the accused's sense of reality. Step 3. Examination. The body is searched for marks, moles, scars, birthmarks. Any irregularity becomes potential evidence of a devil's mark, proof of a pact. Sometimes areas of the body were pricked with needles. If the accused didn't react either because of natural insensitivity or because fear had numbed them, this was recorded as proof. The examination was often conducted publicly or semi-publicly. The humiliation was intentional. Step 4. Interrogation. The accused is questioned. Sometimes physical pain is applied. Techniques varied by region but included thumbscrews, strappado, hanging by bound arms, leg vices, and stretching racks. But pain wasn't always necessary. Exhaustion was often more effective. Sleep deprivation, days without rest, constant questioning, disorientation, loss of time, hallucinations. The accused would be woken every few hours, questioned, then returned to the cell, then woken again. After several days, most people couldn't think clearly. But here's the critical part. The interrogators didn't wait for the accused to invent a story. They supplied one. You flew through the air at night, you attended a gathering in the forest, you met the devil there. He appeared as a man dressed in black. You signed a pact with him, you renounced God. These weren't questions, they were statements. The accused, exhausted and terrified, eventually repeated these details back. Sometimes, word for word, this was recorded as confession. A confession didn't end the case, it expanded it. Because after the accused confessed to their own activities, the interrogators always asked the same final question. Who else was there? Who else attended the gathering? Who else made a pact? Every name led to an other arrest. Every arrest led to another interrogation. Every interrogation produced more names. The system fed itself. The process worked because it was consistent. The same steps were followed in village courts and city tribunals, in Catholic territories and Protestant regions, in wealthy areas and poor ones. Everyone knew what would happen once someone was accused, and that knowledge changed behavior. People stopped defending their neighbors because defending someone accused of witchcraft made you suspect. People stopped questioning the authorities because questioning the process made you suspect. People learned to stay quiet because silence was the only safe position. The Prince Bishop of Würzburg, Philip Adolfberg, oversaw one of the most intense witch hunts in European history. In just 5 years, at least 900 people were executed in his territory. The accused included people from every level of society, children as young as 7 years old, university students, priests, city councillors, the vice-chancellor of the university, relatives of the judges overseeing the trials. A document from 1629 lists 29 executions carried out in a single batch. Among those names, a girl of 9 or 10 years, a boy of 12, the prettiest girl in Würzburg, a student who knew many languages, a wandering boy of 12. Another list from the same period includes Goebbels' child, the prettiest girl in town, a boy of 10 who went to school, 2 strange boys. Age offered no protection. Education offered no protection. Social status offered no protection. The process consumed whoever was named. There was another dimension to what happened in Würzburg. When someone was convicted of witchcraft, their property was seized. The costs of the trial, the imprisonment, the interrogation, the execution were charged to the accused's estate. If they owned land, it was taken. If they had savings, it was confiscated. They had possessions. They were sold. In some cases, the families of the executed were left with nothing. In other cases, the families themselves were accused next. This created an economic incentive structure. Trials generated revenue. Confessions produced more trials. More trials generated more revenue. The machine became self-sustaining. 60 miles away, Prince Bishop Jan Georg II Fuchs von Dornheim pursued his own campaign. He built a specialized facility, the Druden House, the Witch House. It was designed specifically for processing witch trials, interrogation chambers, holding cells, administrative rooms where confessions were recorded, and property transfers were documented. Approximately 600 people were executed in Bamberg during this period. Among them, Johannes Arnunius. He was the mayor of Bamberg, a respected official, a man of education and standing. In 1628, he was accused of witchcraft. During his imprisonment, Junius managed to smuggle a letter to his daughter, Veronica. The letter still exists. In it, he described what happened during his interrogation. He was shown the instruments. He was told what would happen if he didn't confess. He insisted he was innocent. They applied the thumb screws, then the leg vices. He still maintained his innocence. They used strapper to hanging him by his arms tied behind his back. He screamed that he would confess to anything. They took him down and gave him time to remember. Then they asked him questions. Where did you meet the devil? What did he look like? What did he promise you? Who else was there? He gave them the answers they wanted. He described a meeting in the forest. He described the devil as a man in dark clothing. He named other people. All of it was invented under torture. He ended the letter to his daughter. They say I have confessed. That is true. But how I came to confess, good God in heaven knows. They have. Taken me through so much that I know not whether I am alive or dead. Now, dear child, you have here all my acts and confession for which I must die. It is all falsehood and invention. So help me God. He was burned alive 3 days after writing that letter. What happened in Würzburg and Bamberg happened in dozens of other locations. Trier, approximately 368 executions between 1581 and 1593. Ellwangen, approximately 430 executions between 1611 and 1618. The Basque region, approximately 7,000 investigated, though most were not executed due to skeptical inquisitors. Scotland, approximately 4,000 executions between 1560 and 1707. The specific numbers varied, the legal procedures varied, the intensity varied, but the core process remained the same. Accusation, isolation, interrogation, confession, execution, new accusations. The executions were public events. They took place in town squares or designated execution grounds. They were attended by crowds, sometimes hundreds of people. The condemned were often transported in carts through the streets before reaching the execution site. The method varied by region. Burning at the stake was common in German territories. Hanging was more common in England and Scotland. Some regions used both, hanging first, then burning the body. The executions could last hours. They were designed to be witnessed. The audience wasn't there to mourn. They were there to watch. They were there to learn. That accusation was more dangerous than guilt. That defending someone made you suspect. That the process was more powerful than innocence. That asking questions was risky. That survival required silence. The executions taught everyone watching how to behave. And that lesson was reinforced every time the process repeated. The witch hunts didn't continue because everyone believed in witchcraft. They continued because the system had become self-justifying. Execution proved that witches existed. Each confession proved that the interrogation methods worked. Each new accusation proved that the threat was ongoing. The machine produced its own evidence. Courts could point to confessions as proof. Officials could point to executions as results. Communities could point to the next accusation as justification. Questioning the system required admitting that previous executions might have been wrong. The confession never arrived on its own, and without it, the entire mechanism stalled. Confession was not a detail of the process. It was the core. Without confession, doubt crept in. With confession, everything that followed became acceptable. Once the accused spoke the words, the system no longer needed proof. Guilt had been declared by the person standing trial, often publicly, often repeatedly. How those words were obtained was irrelevant to the official record. Whether they were forced through pain, deprivation, or suggestion did not matter. What mattered was that the confession existed, written down, signed, witnessed. From there, the process fed itself. Trial records were reused as precedents. Confessions from one case were cited in another. Manuals outlining how to interrogate suspected witches were copied, shared, and taught. Judges and officials who gained experience in one region relocated and carried their methods with them. There was no single authority coordinating this expansion. It spread through imitation, through habit, through repetition. One of the most unsettling developments came with the involvement of children. Children were believed to be especially susceptible to supernatural influence. At the same time, they were seen as innocent witnesses, too young, it was assumed, to fabricate elaborate lies. Their testimony carried weight. In practice, it carried devastating consequences. In several regions, accusatio made by children ignited large-scale trials. In Sweden, beginning in 1668, statements from children in and around the village of Mora led to hundreds of accusations. In Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692, claims made by young girls triggered a chain of arrests that ended with around 85 executions. The pattern was consistent. Children were questioned repeatedly. They were guided toward specific answers. They were praised when they described the right visions, the right meetings, the right names. Over time, they learned what adults expected, and they gave it to them. The system began to falter only when it turned inward, when judges, clergy, city officials, and members of the nobility started appearing among the accused. Concern spread, not for justice, but for safety. If education, status, and authority offered no protection, then participation in the system became a risk. Quietly, procedures shifted. Courts began to demand additional evidence. Confessions extracted under torture were treated with increasing skepticism. Legal standards were tightened. The machinery slowed. By the mid-1600s, the most intense phase of the witch trials had largely ended, not because mercy prevailed, but because self-preservation did. The numbers remain debated, but historians broadly agree on the scale. Between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe, primarily between 1560 and 1660. Some estimates are higher, some are lower. Records were incomplete, destroyed, or never kept. But the magnitude is unmistakable. The majority of those executed were women, roughly 3/4. Most were older. Many lived alone. Nearly all were economically vulnerable. For every person put to death, Countless others watched. They watched neighbors arrested. They watched trials unfold. They watched executions carried out in public spaces. And they adapted. They learned to avoid disputes. They learned to display obedience. They learned to attend church without exception. They learned to stay silent. They learned not to stand apart. The system killed tens of thousands, but it disciplined millions. Entire communities were altered. Trust between neighbors collapsed. Traditional knowledge, held by healers, midwives, and herbalists, was erased or driven underground. Everyday interactions became cautious, measured, restrained. Fear reshaped social life. That fear did not vanish when the trials stopped. Today, thousands of surviving documents remain in European archives. Court transcripts, confessions, lists of executions, property seizure records, official correspondence. They reveal something crucial. This was not chaos. It was not spontaneous mob violence. It was administration. Procedures were followed, forms were filed, steps were recorded, outcomes were catalogued. The same questions appear across regions, the same narratives repeat, the same confessions surface again and again. The witch hunts did not uncover witches. They produced confessions. They transferred property. They enforced conformity. They demonstrated authority. They taught societies that the fear of accusation was more powerful than the pursuit of truth. The executions were the most visible outcome, but they were the smallest part of what happened. What truly endured was the template, a model for controlling populations through suspicion, a model for extracting admissions that legitimize predetermined outcomes, a model where procedure outweighs reality. That template did not disappear in the late 1600s. It was reused, refined, rebranded, different enemies, different language, different justifications. The same machine, the witch hunts, ended centuries ago. The system they revealed never did, and the most disturbing histories are not the ones that feel distant, but the ones that show us how far. These patterns still are. This is Crimson States, and we keep examining the parts of history that were never meant to be comfortable.